League, International League for Peace and Human Rights, is sponsoring this event to speak about the prospects of peace in Yemen, reality and challenges. Now, these panelists, they are well-known experts, not only in the Yemeni issue, also in human rights and the Yemen situation in general. We have seen the Stockholm Agreement last December, as it was thought so. It was a breakthrough to reach a deal, and it was a push from the international community to reach to such agreement. But now we are turning to the 7 months this accord not yet implemented. So this is, it reflects that is the peace, it might be sustainable if it is agreed or no. So this is, we have many questions from international community, from researchers, and from the Yemenis. Yemenis would like to see break out of the war, would like to see end of humanitarian crisis, humanitarian catastrophe, but also they are eager to see sustainable peace. Now, this sustainable peace, it has its own provision and it is measures. Today, the panelists, they are going to highlight different subjects on peace, what is next, and how is it going to be sustainable. We are going to hear first from Dr. Hamadan from my left here. He is a researcher, human rights advocate, and prize winner, writer, Deputy Rector of Yemeni Centre for Studies and Research in Yemen. He is going to speak about what is the fundamental principles for realistic peace. And of course, we are going to hear from the panelists, and later on you will have opportunity to ask questions, comment after your their inter dialogue speak. I will give the floor to Dr. Hamadan to highlight his paper. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the kind introduction. I'll be talking about the fundamental principles for a realistic peace in Yemen. As we all know, it's been now almost 5 years since the Yemeni conflict began, and despite few peace talks and ceasefires, the war continues, resulting in the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, according to various UN reports, with no sign actually that the situation is improving. A new approach, therefore, is actually needed to solve this conflict. I believe this approach is based on several factors, including redefining the conflict, changing the policies of the international community and key players, which still view Yemen as a backyard for other nations, and more importantly, laying the groundwork for Yemenis to reach commonly agreed upon principles. Today I will focus on the last point, highlighting some of the fundamental principles which I believe must be agreed by all parties, whether they are directly or indirectly involved in the conflict. That's if we really are serious about ending the ongoing cycle of violence eventually ending the war and ensuring that there will be an achievable and sustainable peace in Yemen. Otherwise, all efforts and endeavors by the international community and key players in the West or in the region to attain peace in Yemen will be in vain, and we will continue talking about peace for a long time without anything really happening. And before I speak about these unifying principles, let me explain why Yemenis need to agree on and commit themselves to such principles. There are three reasons. The first is, without such principles, it will be extremely difficult to impose any type of long-term ceasefire. An example is what we have recently seen is the international pressure to halt the advance of the legitimate government forces in Hodeidah last November and reach a ceasefire as a result of the Stockholm Agreement signed in December. All this did not actually stop the military clashes. Rather, it encouraged a new wave of military confrontations initiated by Houthis in several regions, for example, Hajjah, Dala' and Ib. This was in addition to the ongoing fighting intensifying on other fronts, such as Taz and Al-Bayda. Second, without such principles, any possible long-term ceasefire or cessation of hostilities won't necessarily mean an end to the war. Previous wars in the modern history of Yemen, whether prior to or following the 1962 revolution, tell us this. Third, ending the war without addressing the conflict's roots and causes and taking practical steps to mitigate them will only allow the cycle of conflict to erupt again. Even if there was a decisive victory by one side of the conflict, the problem could flare up at any time. For example, in 1994, there was an end to the war, but not an end to the problem. And because the problem was not solved, it resurfaced almost 8 years later. This can also be applied to what is known as the 6 wars between the Houthis and the Yemeni government, which took place between 2004 and 2009. So, in my view, there are 4 main fundamental principles in order to achieve a realistic peace in Yemen. First, abandoning violence and armed conflict as a means to take or share power or to obtain political or social demands or rights. Second, democracy and only democracy must be the basis of any future political systems, which must adhere to and committed to freedoms, human rights, socio-economic justice, and obviously equal citizenship. 3. The third principle is preserving the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the state as an immediate means to ensuring Yemen's stability and its people safety and security. The fourth principle is recognizing that alleviating the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is the #1 priority in the post-conflict reconstruction process. So these were the 4 fundamental principles that I thought Yemenis should agree before any realistic peace can be reached. And due to the time constraint, I will only focus on the 2 principles, namely the abandoning violence and armed conflicts as means to take or share power, and ensuring democracy as the only basis of any future political system in Yemen. As to the first principle, the Houthi movement should recognize that the only way for this conflict to end and for the group to be accepted in any future settlement is to comply with the UN Security Council resolutions and abandon the heavy weaponry and ammunition it looted from the Yemeni army in 2004 and after. The Houthi movement also must end its problematic relationship with Iran, a relationship that has been evidently recognized as a constant threat to the regional and international stability and security. It should do all this before it gets designated as a terrorist organization, similar to other groups such as Ansar al-Sharia or Ansar al-Sunnah or Ansar al-Din, or in particular, similar to its ally, Hezbollah, which has been listed as a terrorist organization earlier this year by the United Kingdom. Actually, this designation is not really unrealistic, as some observers believe, particularly if one takes into account the changing dynamics of international policies and the fact that the Houthi movement has committed unprecedented acts of violence and violations to human rights during the nearly 5-year conflict. It's worth remembering also that at one stage of this conflict, the Yemen government requested the UN Security Council recognize the Houthis as a terrorist group in 2017. This is in addition to the fact that 2 countries already listing them as a terrorist organization, namely Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Therefore, the Houthi movement must comply with the UN Security Council resolutions before it's too late. Because if the movement is classified as a terrorist organization by the US or the UK or any other key players, then there will be legal and political consequences that will hinder any future peace talks or initiatives by the international community, therefore creating additional obstacles to ending the war in Yemen by peaceful means. One must also point to another obstacle that needs to be addressed, which is the empowerment of armed non-state actors by the Arab coalition, which has greatly weakened the position of Yemen's legitimate government and law enforcement bodies. I'm talking here in particular about the regional-based militias created in the south of Yemen, which, despite being theoretically affiliated with the legitimate government, they operate largely outside government control, as stated by the UN Panel of Experts report. The existence and growth of such armed non-state actors is a fundamental problem and has many definitive and negative consequences for Yemen's stability and for any future settlement. As to the second principle, which is to agree that democracy is the only valid means to govern Yemen, the Houthi movement must convert to a political party bound by Yemeni law. Houthis must accept the fact that their present claim to power, based on their ideology of divine right and ritual supremacy, is not and should not be acceptable to both Yemenis and the international community. In fact, because this aspect has been ignored for many years and for many reasons, Houthis' racism has provoked a kind of expected reverse racism that has begun to make itself evident. Sooner or later, this will gain momentum and become a mainstream problem. The negative impact of all this on the social fabric in Yemen, as well as in any future reconciliation efforts, is rather obvious. Actually, this racism element in the Houthi movement ideology and practices has been recognized lately by the international community and Western countries, and I think it will gain more momentum. And recently there was an incident that proved this. 2 weeks ago, a member of the British Parliament from the Labour Party had to apologize for inviting a representative of the Houthi movement after being criticized by the press, by the British press, for hosting a representative of an anti-Semitic group. So, to solve this dilemma, Houthis must abandon their unrealistic theological claims and racist slogans and practices, and make assurances to the Yemeni people that equal citizenship is absolute and cannot be compromised under any circumstances. Further, they must agree that the only way to gain or share power is through elections and political settlements. These were actually the main two principles that I wanted to highlight about, and I will leave the rest to, because of time constraint, to open discussion. So please fire your questions about them. So that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hamadan. You have highlighted very important points, mainly the obstacles. I might have some points later on after colleagues, they will present their papers. I might have to discuss with you some of these points for in the sake for the audience to enlarge the discussions. Now, I will jump to our colleague here. She is very dynamic. She came all over the way with her child, with her baby and her husband from Stockholm. See, you can imagine how far she is working hard. And she is smiling too. Another. So now she's Bushra Nasr. She is senior economic expert in Middle East and Africa and Asia, founder of Sabaa consulting service in Sweden. Is that right? And she's going to speak about the evaluation of international community in the Yemeni conflict. We know since 2011 that Yemen has been very much in picture, and the international community become very much involved. But so far, the Yemenis, they are paying the price, in fact. So she will have a good picture, and she will tell us what is the involvement of the international community in this conflict. And she has prepared, I'm sure, a very good presentation, and she will use the PowerPoint. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Yes, okay. So, is it, I don't know how to make it live here. Can some, is there any, okay. Is it going to present on? while we try to solve this technical problem, I'll talk about what is the presentation about. I will try to assess the role of the international community and the UN in the Yemeni conflict. And the assessment was made by the Yemeni people themselves. I have sent online questionnaire to my network, and I asked them to send it out to people outside the network because I don't want it to be biased. I want this questionnaire to be answered as well by as many people inside the country and outside the country. I wanted it to be answered by people who are committed. It was a very long questionnaire with a lot of writings. I was lucky that I got 91 responses and in a short time. And I think it's very important that we take a deep breath after 5 years of war to find out what is going wrong. So let me go ahead. By the first question I raised in the questionnaire, how do you find the role of the United Nations and the international community in Yemen? The answers came out. It takes 5 minutes. Okay, I can talk a little bit because it's diagrams. The answers came out saying that the role of the United Nations was 90% negative, 6% neutral, and 4% positive. While the role of the international community, 85% negative, 3% positive, and 12% neutral. 12% neutral, yes. So, is it, should I wait a bit? Oh, sorry.
Because it's on.
I'll take a pause. No problem. It's because of the heat. It's really hot now in Geneva. Yeah.
Are you connected with your PC?
This is the PC of the
club. Oh
of
yeah.
the club.
Oh yes, right.
I can get out from the presentation.
No, I think it's okay. Elle avait mis F5.
Oui, c'est parfait.
Yes, thank you. Great. Great. So I asked people to tell me how do they find the role of the UN and the international community? Yes.
Can you
Go.
start again?
Start
The beginning?
from the beginning. Okay. This is the evaluating of the role of international community. This study was made through Google questionnaire. It was distributed through my network and shared with their networks. Within a short time, I received 91 answers. I didn't ask for the names or any. I left it because I want people to feel safe to talk. It was a very long questionnaire, so people who are committed to answered. And it was really important to say that some of the questions were written questions and people answered really long answers. I thank them for this. And this shows the commitment and the will of the people to evaluate and rethink how this conflict has been managed. So within the first question, I asked the people, how do you find the role of the international community and the UN? I got these answers. 90% said negative, the UN involvement, and 6% it was neutral and 4% positive. When the international community, 85% negative, 12% neutral, and 3% positive. I ask another question. Who is the most international envoy, UN envoy, negatively affected the Yemeni file? The answers: Martin Griffiths was number 1, 53%, Jamal bin Omar, 41%, and Ismail Wuld al-Sheikh was 6%. These questions have also some clarification answers, but because of the short of the time of the presentation, I'm going to just give the statistics today. So the second question I asked, what are the imbalances that the United Nations is playing today in the political file in Yemen, or played? I received 91 answers. I tried to summarize and categorize these answers in different categories. And here are the people answers. There is no real commitment to the 3 terms of references of the conflict, nor the international resolutions. Though they are aware of the supremacy beliefs of the Houthis, no condemned by the UN to this ideology. Not responding to the street and the will of the street. The pulse of the street is very important, the pulse of the Yemeni people. Divided the Yemeni conflict and fragmented it to extend the war and so on. Lack of credibility. No adherence to 2216, where a military solution should be. I found these answers repeatedly. Lack of transparency. The envoy used only pressure tools towards the legitimate government. I found this. Non-neutral. The office of the envoy does not respect the legitimate government in depth. There are no pressure tools or lobbying mechanisms that the envoy can exercise on obstructing parties. Definition and terms used equalized rebels and government of all parties. And they call them conflict of all parties. The definition of the root of the conflict used by the United Nations is incorrect. Others, people said some other reasons. The envoy uses pressure tools only on the Houthis. This is one answer. And here are the statistics of these answers when I categorize them. Some of these answers are repeated, like they say, for example, there is a pressure on this and that, resolution 22. So this is this is the results. And you see more than 48% or something are problem. 71%, no real commitment to the 3 terms of reference. Is there any positive advantages of the UN? Unfortunately, they say no positive advantages, 47. Mediation, 13%. And relief operations, 17%. Resolution 2216 with halt of implementation, 6%. Sabotaging, 16%. Then I asked, who are the countries involved in the conflict? The US and the UK got the same percentage, 39%. Iran and Saudi Arabia, same, 18%. And then the rest, UAE, 7%, Oman, 6%, Sweden, 2%, and Germany, 3%, Turkey, 30%, and so on. Qatar, 5%. Do you think that Saudi involvement is, what do you think about it? Negative, 62%, neutral, 8%, positive, 30%. And there are also clarifications, but because of this short time, I cannot talk about what they said about these clarifications. What about the UAE involvement? Negative, 87%, positive, 11%, and neutral, 2%. So, I ask about the Swedish, because I'm Swedish citizen also, Yemeni Swedish. I found that 49% they think that Sweden has an influential role. But unfortunately, it was negative. It was affecting negatively the conflict. Maybe they said 30% and no 21%. So I asked, what are the building blocks for peace with all these imbalances that's happening? And I got these answers. Strengthening the legitimate government, 18%. They said only strengthening the legitimate government. Transparently expose the supremacy ideology, 8%. Firmly put pressure to any party obstructing the peace, 18%. But the majority said all of above. So they think all of these are the building blocks for building peace. So this is the political file, and it was the most intensive file. And the clarifications are also... I will move into the role of the international community when it comes to the economy. What I asked the people, what is the main reason of poverty and famine in Yemen? Siege and war was 33%, no salaries 20%, 21%, government corruption 16%, the looting relief by the Houthis was 16%, corruption within the international organizations 12%, all above 1%. And then I asked because when the deteriorating of the currency is also one of the major reasons as economist. So I asked, what is the major factor for the collapse of the currency? I got 56% as the siege and war and the halt of the oil exports. And the second thing was the Houthi currency manipulated by the Houthis manipulating and speculation of the currency, 25%. Government corruption and poor performance of the central bank was 4%, and corruption with the international organization was about 3%. What are the second major important factor of the collapse of the currency? They said 37% said that the Houthi manipulating of the currency and speculating of the currency. Government corruption was also there, 21%. Poor performance of the central bank, 20%, and so on. So these are some of the answers I received, because all these answers has clarifications, and shockingly, I received between 91 and 50-something answers, written answers, and these are not any easy to keep writing every single question or clarify what do you mean. The United Nations didn't use the central bank channels and the government channels in distributing aid and salary payment. This is one answer. I'm quoting. The United Nations is the head entity of the currency speculation. The United Nations created new entities lacking professional standards, transparency, and monitoring mechanisms. This is when it comes to the economic file. Some of the responses, it insisted on running its business from areas controlled by the Houthis to bow to the conditions and demands of the Houthis in the policy and management of the relief work. Most of the relief work materials distributed by the United Nations organizations have become the main entrance to support the Houthis group and militia. This is, I'm quoting one statement, one answer. It overlooks the systematic corruption practiced by the Houthis groups in the relief field because there is no real control over the relief work carried out by these organizations and the accompanying financial procedures. Relief work in Yemen has become a mean of enriching the organizers of these organizations, not activate the principle of transparency and clarity in the work of relief organizations. Most relief items go to non-poor people affected by the war. Just one thing I forgot to point out. This research, or the role of the international community, came out because there were many campaigns in Yemen. The first campaign called "Where is the money? Where is the money? Wain al-Fulus?" Yemen Black NGO Hall. Second campaign was about determination for a military solution. Third campaign was against the UN Envoy Office. And many campaigns come out without any response from the international community. And one of these campaigns I'm referring to is Wain al-Fulus, where is the money? 7,000 emails have been sent to the international organizations by the Yemeni people asking for transparency financial reports and exposing the financial reports. We got zero responses. Emails has been sent to the donor countries. Also, we received no answers or pressures for those organizations to expose their financial reports. So I ask another question. Who do you think is the main supporter for Yemen economically? 50% they said it's Saudi Arabia, and 30 thinks nobody is supporting Yemen. UAE 4%, and Germany 3%, Japan. I'm talking about the economy here, and etc. Then I ask the question, do you think that development and reconstruction should come back? I received that development should come back 98%. Answered yes, and starting reconstruction and building the country, they answered 74%. And I asked what are the most important services is important. They said supporting the Yemeni economy and the re-export got the highest, 82%, and then come electricity and water, 82%, education, 79%, health, 77%, and supporting with income-generating activities and products was 73%. Now I discussed the economy file and the political file. I'll move into the humanitarian aid. Within the humanitarian aid, I asked the same question. Do you think that what was the role of the UN in the relief sector and so on? They said it's 67% think that they were negative, and 17% think it's positive, 16% are neutral. And here are some of the quotations, or I categorized these answers. I received zillions of, all answers. One of the answers was about supporting the aid, supported the Houthis financially and played a blind role on their violations. Again, it comes out, these answers. Corruption came out again. Politicized the relief as happened in the Battle of Hudaydah. This is another answer I received. Absence of accountability and transparency in the relief work. Lack of responses, acts towards the Yemeni street. Another, the pulse of the Yemeni people was also missing. And I asked the people, what do you think about the suggested solutions? And I received transparency, monitoring, work with government of Yemen. There is no trust in anyone. This is one of the answers. Categorized answers. Politically, put pressure on the Houthis. The selection of their cards and organizations should be based on professional standards. Combining relief items, salaries, and development projects. This is some of the categorized answers. Do you think, I asked, do you think that the international organizations should, because we know that they are under the control of Houthis. They're working within this Sana'a capital under the control of Houthis, and this is one of the major problems. I asked, do you think that the international organization should move to Aden, their offices should move to Aden and function from Aden? 50% said yes, maybe 9%, and no, 21%. And then I asked, who do you think are the main donors, aid donors? Saudi Arabia, people believe that she is 57%. Kuwait, shockingly, I found that the people think that Kuwait is the main donor, 23%. Kuwait has been in Yemen, one of our major supporter. We have the Hospital of Kuwait, we have schools from Kuwait, we have many things since the 70s. So people still in the back mind think that Kuwait is one of the main donors. USA 6%, UAE 5%, UK 3%. So when I see this statistics, it shows that the people of Yemen don't see the international community donations on the ground. They see other big players, but not. So there is a problem here. They don't, which means again, because most of these international community channel their aid through the UN organizations, people don't see this there is no impact on the ground. Seriously, there is a problem. So how do you assess the role of the United Nations played regarding human rights? And this is my fourth section I'm talking about, is human rights. They think that the United Nations played a negative role when it comes to human rights, 64%, neutral 28%, and positive 8%. How do you assess the role of the international community when it comes to human rights? Negatively, 73%, positive 4%, and neutral 23%. For the sake of the short time I have for presenting all this, the negative, people feel left because there are a lot of violations going on the ground, is not exposed, is not discussed, is not amplified in the corridors of the international and the UN organizations, and the reports also. So this is the major problem here. How to correct the roles in the Yemeni context regarding human rights? I tried to categorize these answers. Actually, it was a list. Reducing child protection. By the way, we didn't hear anything about child recruitment in the UN Security Council. We have 50,000. This is one of the statistics I heard lately. The Associate Press discussed about 30% of the Houthis rebels are children. Lately, I heard it's about 50,000. I'm not sure about the figure yet, but it's quite huge figure, 18,000 or 50,000. And this is one aspect. The second aspect, promote women's right in building peace, 42%, and then strengthening the civil society and human rights, 65%. We heard about the suspension of the aid by the WFP, and it is a statement that came out shocking because there is no access to aid. The Houthis are preventing WFP from access and aid distribution, and it is by itself a war crime. And it implies a different thing. It implies that the civil society is not just shrinking; it is crashed. If the international organizations are working in such situation, not being able to access to aid and access and distribute the aid, what about the civilian? So this is one important thing that the international community should support. Like now in Yemen, in Sana'a or Houthi-controlled area, you cannot establish an organization using the word peace or work any activity with the word peace. So this is very shocking. And then reducing the cultivation of mines. This is, nothing has been mentioned or condemned or discussed internationally. Others, 22%. Human rights issues politicized by the United Nations. I asked, do you think that they are politicized? 85% said yes, 14% said maybe, and 1% said no. For the sake of whom? This is the second question. Houthis, 70%. Saudi Arabia, 19%. UAE, 10%. And legitimate government, I got 1%. Why do not violations on the ground, the siege of Taiz, the recruitment of children, and other domestic violence affect the attention of the international community and the media? I asked. I categorized the answers. It is, they said, the abstention and shedding light over their cases by the United Nations and the Office of the International Envoy. The absence of foreign journalists, a second, it's about 28%. 70% is the first one. It is internal conflict. People think it's an internal conflict, and others, 12%. So there is a major problem in this conflict. So what we need? We need to reimbalance the imbalances. We need to work on all of these items again. Build credibility. Commit to the 3 items of references. Stop fragmenting the conflict. Respond. Be responsive to the pulse of the street. Protect the people. Build credibility based on transparency and results on the ground. Adhere to 2216. And these are the answers also from the people. Being transparent, etc. And here one of them is putting pressure on the parties who are. The problem is that you have a legitimate government. You can put pressure because they are adhering to the international laws. But you have a rebel. They don't care. So what are the... I don't know yet. If somebody can figure out what is the pressure tool, let me know. So, any questions? Thank you.
Excellent presentation, isn't it? Yes. And it's new and not only on view, it's others' response. I think Bushra, you did very good. You did very good job, and it is a good methodology. That's and I think you have to tell us later on about the time in which it took you about using this questionnaire. So it was a good questionnaire, different subject, new subjects, and I sometimes shocked by your findings. But we will refer to that later on when we will have the audience to share with us. Now, we will move to Dr. Mahmood Alazani. He is a researcher, political and human rights advocate, chair of Tamadon Foundation in UK. Dr. Mahmood, he is going to speak about multiple dimensions of the Yemeni conflict, the causes and the consequences. And he is going to give us another picture of what is the roots, which Bushra, she spoke about in her questionnaire, and we are going to listen from Mahmoud what is the details of the causes and what is the consequences. Now we are going to hear another method of paper. Please, Mahmoud, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My talk is about the multiple dimensions of the Yemeni conflict. In my talk, I will try to outline the conflict that Yemen faces and provide a framework for understanding the nature of this conflict by examining the driving causes behind it across three dimensions: national, regional, and international. Mainly, my approach is purely analytical, and I will use the kind of fit or conflict on the fit and conflict basis. This approach is about when there is a new phenomena comes in, whether it's a movement or revolution or social group or political group, you can assess whether it's going to be a peace-building block or a development issue, or it's going to be a challenge which will lead to drawbacks and conflict. So the principle is basic: fit or conflict. In order to understand this, to set the scene right here, we need to define the context and how the crisis started in Yemen. At a significant moment when Yemenis, with support of the international community, had reached a peaceful accord, first time in their history, the Yemeni National Dialogue, you all know about it, Houthis, which is a militant group aligned with the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, revolted against the sitting government and with the support from a foreign country, namely Iran. They took control over several cities, including the capital. On February 2015, they announced their own authority. Significantly here, the way that Houthis seized power and control goes beyond what we know about typical military coups, although it shares some element of it. But that distinction or that definition, it could actually open our eye into kind of different approaches and maybe complement some of the elements which come from Dr. Hamadan and Bushra analysis. They formally, when they invaded, when they took over these cities, they formally and informally replaced the existing government apparatus and laws with their own. Commanders or mushrifin, mostly tribesmen, were placed at every level of the government. Their supreme leader has become the absolute ruler and power broker. They looted government revenues, replaced the traditional market with their own black market, and were not willing to take any responsibility towards citizens in the areas under their control. And recently, of course, you've heard about the looting of international or an obstruction of international aid as well. Add to this. What does that mean? What are the implications on the local, regional, international level? This created a completely new reality with enormous implications for Yemen, for the region, and maybe for the whole world. Such implications could be examined across three dimensions. Nationally, Houthis, talking about the perceptions here, and I'm just complementing what Bushra said. Nationally, Houthis, in the eyes of Yemenis, are a reminder of their recent dark past. A time before the 1962 revolution, when Yemen was ruled by imams. At that time, racial supremacy and discrimination under the divine right claims to power were the main problems and the causes of 1,000 years of internal fractions and confrontations. Repeated wars, famines, diseases, ignorance, and isolation from the rest of the world were the obvious outcomes of many years of its dominance. The movement is seen as the same old product, but disguised in a new Iranian branding and expertise. It would be difficult for Yemenis to reconcile with this idea or accept it under any circumstances. It destroys the social fabric of the Yemeni society, perpetuates the existential conflicts between citizens, and ignite wars for the coming decades, as it did in the past. The second dimension is regional. Houthis are perceived as a proxy agent for Iran, that poses serious threat to the region. They see Houthis as a destabilizing force that would ignite sectarian wars, similar to what has happened in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Their theological claims for power, along with the Iranian slogans and their propaganda style, war tactics, action, and militia style, are all similar to those of Iran. The resemblance is so clear. Yemen and its neighbors have a lot of social and economic ties, shared history, geography, and subsequently shared destiny. If we take a deeper look at the map of this region, we will find Yemen and its neighboring countries not only closely adjacent to each other, territorial-wise, but also their weather, seas, mountains, deserts, tribes are part of each other. Currently, about 3 million people are working in this region. So the security, Yemen, stability and prosperity is essential for the security of the whole region. And the security of the region is essential for the stability and prosperity of the future of Yemen. Therefore, Yemen cannot be afforded to be a platform for hostile groups and proxy warriors that aim to destabilizing regional and international security. Such attitude would be suicidal on a massive scale for all parts. The third dimension is internationally. The attitude towards Houthis in some of the international circles is unfortunately unclear. When an American diplomat was confronted in Yemen about the new Houthi threat, his justification for placating them was that they were a necessary evil, maybe in order to counterbalance other influences nationally or within the region. When some of those presented or reminded about the slogans, including those implications like death to America, death to Israel, cash to Jew, whatever, they jokingly replied, yes, we know they come back as long as they don't bite. I don't want to repeat the history of other terrorist groups. You know it. The unspoken part of this statement is this. Terrorism is a label for groups who target American interests. Doesn't matter if they kill their own co-citizens. That's very dangerous. Politics is the art of possible, and good politics is about making rational choices. Therefore, my advice to those concerned with the situation in Yemen is do not choose the unworkable. Do not choose the unworkable, and do not sacrifice the possible. The only possible route to reach lasting peace and create the right political, the lasting peace and create the political environment for a sustainable development, yes, we realize finally it would be through bringing Yemenis back to around the negotiating table. But that must be based on a very clear and firm principles. First, ending the military coup by implementing the Security Council resolutions and rebuilding the Yemeni state based on the outcomes of the Yemeni national dialogue. Yes, we do understand that there are issues with the performance of the legitimate government. Some are understandable, some could have been avoided, and some need to be condemned. The same could be said about the Arabic Alliance, in particular their responsibility for civilian casualties during the ongoing war. Second, rejecting any form of discrimination or racism, including any claims to power based on divine rights and superstitions. This is not a matter of political correctness, but rather it's a matter of finding the correct path to lasting peace. And such path does not exist within the realm of political religious zealotry. We can all at least agree that racism and claims to power based on divine rights were the mothers of many atrocities throughout the history. As for the neighboring region, Yemen cannot be left behind again. Unstable Yemen would create a dangerous vacuum and a recruiting ground for terrorist groups including Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and of course the new arrivals in the market, Houthis, who represent just another side of the same coin. New approach to regional security needs to be adopted. This approach should be based on true regional economic integration that includes Yemen, an approach where economic development forms the foundation for the regional strategic security. For the international community, standards in dealing with illegal militant groups using violence to achieve political ends, in other words, terrorism, should be one for all. Double standards undermine the credibility of international agents, encourage and give recruiting grounds to other terrorist groups on the waiting. In summary, what I have described might seem to be idealistic. However, sometimes the difficult path is the only way to achieve a real and lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahmoud, for your presentation. And this is, you touch the region, the importance of stability of Yemen, the region, and the new approach of strategic for the region and for Yemen. Also, this is very wise unless the coup is over. Now I can turn to the audience if you have questions or comment. But before that, to elaborate, to give a chance, we have still time to give a chance for the speakers. I may have some points. I would like the panelists here to comment, and then I will give you the opportunity to ask questions or to have a comment. Now, if I start with Dr. Hamadan, you spoke about the obstacles and the root causes also. One of the points which you mentioned, the way out, is democracy in the sake for Yemen stability and reconstructions. I will touch these 2 points. Do you think now democracy, it is a priority? The political parties, which they were in power, in fact, before 2015, they were in power, the oppositions and the ruling party. And some of them, they were members of parliament. And they have to take, and they took the responsibility. And even though they went for the national dialogue, but they, in my own view, some of these political parties, they took part in giving the way out to the Houthis to march to Sana'a. Now, if we are going to speak about democracy, is it worth now? Or you need to go out from the war, you need to go and to educate, to feed the people, to make the security is a priority point for the people, to feed them, to restore the state, to restore the law and order. So is it priority to go for democracy or to restore the law and order and establishment? You need to have not only the establishment of the state, you need also to make the citizens, the public to retrust the establishment of the state. So I think democracy, it can be a later stage, but now we need to be re-establishment of the law and order and reconstruction also. Yemenis, they need to be from now to look to the what is the reconstruction, because you cannot wait. For example, you need sanitation, you need water, you need food, you need schooling, which has been they need to start from now to think, but who is going to finance this? So I think if you can elaborate this more, I will appreciate that.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting point. Yes, there are priorities, but what you have raised actually comes to the core of my debate. If the warring parties don't have a vision of the future they want, if they don't agree on democracy, for example, then why should they stop fighting then? Because then those who will win, they will take power. So sometimes it's not about claiming very high claims. It's actually is the way around. Sometimes what people have been trying to avoid for many years could be actually the door to end the crisis. And if all the warring parties feel that they will not be excluded in the future, then I think the question to go to peace will be easier. For example, if the Houthis will think that everyone don't want them to be part of the future in Yemen, they don't recognize them, they want them to be just a terrorist group, and they will not accept them to share power, then there is no reason for them to stop the fight. And vice versa. If people will think if Houthi won and then they will rule by this divine right, and then they will be a first-class citizens and second-class citizen, then obviously no one will stop fighting. So unless everyone agrees on principles and becoming committed to it, and I think we have at certain stage came close to this, which is the outcome of the dialogue, the national dialogue. We have come to an area where we think many things have been agreed to. So we need to go back to this. So this is my answer to your question. I think if you want stability, if you want reconstruction, you need to end the war. And in order to end the war, you need the warring party to, all of them, to accept certain principles so that they go to the negotiating table and agree on peace. If they don't have these principles, they will keep fighting.
One of the points you spoke about reconstruction. It comes out of the war, now it will be very tight, and the economy is destroyed totally. So who is going to finance who? Who is going to finance this construction period? And we know, we have the experience that donors, they give you 3 billions and 6 billions, but now which has been destroyed is billions. So who is going to have all this? Yemenis, as a state, as citizen, cannot offer. Where is who is going to take this responsibility? Please.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, which was the last principles that I mentioned, but I didn't have time to elaborate on.
Go ahead.
Which is that we have two different views here. We have the Yemeni view of the reconstruction, and we have the international view of the reconstruction. And I was talking actually about the Yemeni view of the reconstruction, because when you talk to different people involved in the conflict, you can see that the reconstruction process is not in their mind now. They don't pay attention to it. And therefore, your questions become valid. They think the war has to stop, and then they will think about the reconstruction process. But I feel that everyone should really start thinking about the reconstruction process from now. And to answer your question as well, who is going to finance this? And I think the international community and the UN, the Arab coalition have actually mentioned before that they have the moral commitment towards the reconstruction efforts in Yemen. And I think they are the ones who are going to supervise this process. And the Yemeni people should also help in facilitating all efforts towards this.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I will move to Bushra also. You should not worry. Prepare your questions and comment if you have later on. But in order to be more beneficial from the speakers, we have to elaborate more the different points. Now, Bushra, she did very outstanding job presentations, and by her questionnaires to different personnel, which she said they are not identified. One of the shocking to me that the role of the UN is 90%, they said is negative, 90%. So now 90% of negative, this is public opinion poll. So now this involvement of the UN, we have references from Security Council resolutions, Human Rights Council, also there is some references. So why you think people that are not confident more about Yemenis to end up this conflict? This is one. You mentioned about countries' involvement. You spoke about Sweden, your country. I think Sweden has to play more a role in development, which I don't have figures that involvement of Sweden aid to Yemen before Stockholm Agreement. But I think now they are involved politically. But from now on, that Sweden has to have priorities and not only to implement the Stockholm Agreement, because it seems that Sweden, they are running to get this deal implemented, which so far did not work out. But now, what is the opportunities Sweden can play a role in implementing sustainable development, even at the time of war? Now, you mentioned about humanitarian aid, the percentage and the looting the donors. You said 64% of the donors is 64%, isn't it? Yes, I have noted that 64% from the donors. Who is the donors? And in one of your answers questions, you said the main assistant or supporter is the Saudi Arabia and UAE, which we see that last February there was pledging conference which UN asked for 3.1 for donors. 50% of this already committed by the Saudi Arabia and UAE. And then in third place comes UK. Now, you remember, you touch also humanitarian, politicizing the humanitarian. We remember last June, there was, at the time of, before reaching the agreement, Stockholm Agreement, there was too much coverage of Hodeidah and the war in Hodeidah. But later on, after Stockholm, we did not hear from the media, from NGOs, from different parties in Western Europe about the humanitarian catastrophic because of the Stockholm Agreement. Why we don't hear now more? Please.
Oh.
Thank you.
Questions. I need another research. With respect to the United Nations percentage, 90%, I was quite I was shocked. I was expecting around 50 something. Around the 50s, let's say. Unfortunately, it's not just the case of Yemen. I don't know if we can point out one country that the United Nations didn't sabotage, whether it's in the region or outside of the region. It's usually, I think, I'll talk from the Yemeni conflict perspective. I think it's the personnel who come from outside, the outsiders. They don't try to do hard work to understand what is this conflict about. And they deal with the bureaucracy and a bit maybe of a, from high perspective, that doesn't touch base on the real situation. This is I could say, This is the main reason. And on the other aspect, it is politicized. Yemen has a very, very sensitive and a very good geopolitical position. Yemen is rich in resources. Yemenis walk on gold. They have a lot of oil and they have a lot of gas and they have a lot of resources, but they are the poorest. And everybody is interested to get a stake in this country. That's why everybody is getting a stake in it, whether it's trying to prolonging the war, bringing in more interests, different interests, and so on. When it comes to Sweden's role, I understand that it was, unfortunately, I could say that, as many countries as well, the depth of the conflict is not understood properly. And it's not, there is no exercise to listen to the people needed. I haven't seen any real seminars or conferences taking place, for example, in Sweden to discuss the depth of this conflict or something. I think this is one of the main reasons where people think that Sweden played a role. They found themselves, they speak, Sweden is a country I respect, I love. They are very human rights adherent. They stand with their own they stand strongly with the human rights aspects. And I think it was like we need to put humanitarian perspective as a priority when the hostility took place in Hodeidah. Unfortunately, this is the case in Hodeidah is another things, how things are politicized. Hodeidah port, when the legitimate government was about 4 kilometers away from Hodeidah, the UN Security Council meeting raised the issue of humanitarian issue and etc., humanitarian access to aid, etc. And I read later in the international expert report by United Security Council that Hodeidah is not the main port for delivering goods and containers. Only 30% of the containers goes to Hodeidah since November 2017. So the whole, chaos about Hodeidah in the end of 2018 was politicized. Since Hodeidah, or since Stockholm Agreement or discussion or consultation, there is no access to aid still. It's getting worse, and nothing is discussed about it. The hostility increased. It's only in the port, maybe port areas where the things, the war has stopped. But the many people have been affected. 800 people have been killed and injured, and etc. in Hodeidah. So there is still hostility going on, not only on the Hodeidah city, but Amran, as Mr. Hamadan said, Amran to Hajur, Al-Dala, and Eb, and Taiz, and etc. Human rights being politicized, etc. This is one of the role of the international community. There is no real pressure, as I said, regarding child recruitment. There is no real pressure regarding landmines. We are sitting here next to the chair that represents landmines. Princess Diana, if she is still alive, she will be one of the main campaigner against landmines in Yemen. It's the largest country by planted landmines, and nobody is discussing it. I discussed supremacy with many UN officers who work on the Yemeni file. They know it, but they think that it could come later, discussing this issue. But that's not the reality. They have to understand the conflict proper. So this urge to deepen their understanding. When it comes to donation and looting, according to this, they think that 64% is looted. Actually, what the WFP director said, he said, yeah, David, he said 60% is confiscated by the Houthis. But it's not just the confiscation that is happening. There is corruption also. There is no lack of transparency. There is a reluctance to use and harness technology, like biometric, to identify the people who will use this or receive this aid. Yemeni people, unfortunately, we Yemeni people are, they don't have network, they don't speak the language, they are not able to access Europe and USA, UK to talk what's going on. So there is a miscommunication going on. And the UN, though they do, I think they do, I lost the word. Recognize the legitimate government. However, through their reports, etc., and discussions, and they talk about different parties, and this is just reflecting the way they are tackling the problem, which will never going to be solved unless the legitimate government is strengthening, the state government is strengthening the economy, ending the black market is one of the major issues that the country needs to work on. Ending the money supply or the money cycle outside of the central bank, to end the terrorists and end the money laundering that is taking place, that is supporting these rebels to continue the war, supporting them to buy the weapons, etc. According to reports, they found 900 something beehives of cryptocurrency, of one of the currencies that is not like Bitcoin. It's one of the most untraceable currencies. So there is a lot of things going on. Yemen, people think it's poor, but when it comes to real estate sector in Sana'a, it's booming. Access for the latest decorations for villas and etc. is there. So there is war, economy of war, and we need to end this economy of war.
Yes, you are right.
To end this.
Thank you, Bushra, for your interview. I will move to Dr. Mahmood, then we will give a chance to, and you have to raise questions. Be careful. I will ask all of you to. Now, Mahmood, you spoke about thank you. You spoke one of a very important point which you have mentioned is ending the military coup based on the references. Now, one of the very important references is 2216. And 2216 resolutions, there was, in my view, there was some defection in it. How? First of all, though it was under Chapter 7, but there was no mechanism to implement, and there was no time frame to implement these resolutions. Why? Other Security Council resolutions, which issued after Stockholm, there was time frame and mechanism. The mechanism is relocation of troops and so on. Now, there was a debate about is still these references, mainly 2216, still valid, because there is different parties. Now, one of the parties is not recognizing this 2216. And how do you see this, based references can be implemented while one of the Houthis, they are not recognized? This is one. Now, you spoke about new approach in the region. Security, military, And this is this, you think this new approach, it should be now on? The war is, you don't know when this war is going to be last on. So do you think is it wise to start now or to wait till the deteriorating situation you cannot control it? Okay. So how you see that this approach can be, and what is the involvement of regional powers, international powers?
Okay.
Please.
Thank you. The question is, for me, the question is twofold. On the one hand, it's about is those references still valid, for example, to build a peace on? The other side of it, the new approach. Between those is the idea of looking at the circumstances when those resolutions have been taken, in particular. The absence of enforcement mechanism is definitely linked to the whole political situation in the region. Remember, at that particular time, it was a democratic government in the United States of America that was following the signage of the so-called Iranian West Agreement deal. Yeah, and they realized that Houthis at that particular time, they crossed the lines, and the whole concern is about bringing them back to the power sharing agreement that was brokered in by the international community. Unfortunately, there is two mistakes in the whole approach on that one. The first one, it was dealing with the situation as if it was simple military coup, which means one side who committed this coup need to recognize these resolutions and start negotiation. But if we look deeper at the whole situation, what happens is more than a military coup. And to resolve it, we need a new approach. But because references are there, you don't sacrifice them, because you don't need another starting point unless you make sure that every party in the international level will give you a better alternative. Which better alternative, if that alternative will come based on a different definition and understanding for the problem, then those references become obsolete. If not, if you cancel or ignore those references right now, that means you lost every legitimacy for the international community, for the government, and you have only fighting fractions on the ground. That's it, if you ignore references. The new approach, which is particularly about the development, I think it should start now. I think I'm not focusing, and I'm not expert in military issues, but the challenge of creating successful model, I think it's the most important one, particularly at this stage. We know clearly that there is a statement of 85% of the territory of the country, it's outside of Houthis' control. There is a good chance to start the reconstruction and the rebuilding of state and services in these areas. If you give people good, attractive example, it will change the whole dynamics. And maybe you might not need more military solutions. That's my understanding.
Thank you very much. Now it is your turn. If you have questions or comment, first of all, you have to present yourself and mention also your title. And we have a guest here. Please, floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. My name is Patricia. I'm from the German mission. Thank you very much for organizing this and for all your interesting presentations. It was very interesting to hear each and every one of you. I do have a question for Mrs. Kretschmer. I was wondering, these 91 responses that you've gotten through the Google questionnaire, do you have any information on who they are, how they're involved in the Yemen conflict? And yeah, I think you said something about this at the very beginning, but I have missed that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patricia. The 91, it was a very short, I had to send the question in a short time. And the 91 let's say they are the educated people, the professional people who are involved in a way being activists or being how to say ضحية affected victims. So I have friends who have group of 200,000 maybe, but I said I don't want to have this question to be sent there because it's going to create a mass output that might come from people who are not in depth of the conflict, people who are just on the social media sabotaging and being biased or whatever. I wanted the people who are professional, the people who understand the conflict, the people who are victims, who reach victims to answer. And when it comes to the economic part as well, I shared it with people who work with the private sector and the banking sector as well. When it comes to human rights, I shared it with people and groups who are working with human rights activities and reporting. On the ground, they have their reporters and everything. When it came to political aspect, I shared it with those who I know. They are political analysts. But I asked them to share it with their networks because it's important that, I had to share it with different people categories that I feel like people will give me feedback. If I just send it to the human rights activists, they will not give me feedback when it comes to economy, when it comes to... So I had to get a sense of everyone, what he thinks and so on. But let's say they are professional, they know how to use the internet and the questionnaire online, at least.
Thank you.
Maybe just as a follow-up, were they all based inside Yemen at the time that they answered the questionnaire, or were they outside of Yemen?
No, the networks were inside and outside, in diaspora and inside the country. And as I said, this questionnaire was quickly made because I had very limited time. It came out as because of the many Where's the money, which is still running for more than 6 months now, asking for transparency and financial reports. And there is this campaign for military solution, campaign for, there are many campaigns going on the social media and the media itself, the radios and so on, discussions in the Arabic Yemeni channels and so on. But there is nothing reflecting from the international community. So I thought this could help to find out what is going on wrong, what do they want?
بالنسبة للدكتور همدان، عندما تكلم على جماعة الحوثي بأنها إرهابية سياسية، إنها إرهابية، جماعة إرهابية، كيف في نفس الوقت طالبوا بأن تكون حركة سياسية وفي نفس الوقت إنه يكون في اعتراف من الاعتراف الدولي بأنها جماعة إرهابية؟
شكرا. أولا الحديث عن الحركة الحوثية كحركة إرهابية هو أمر مطروح منذ بداية الأزمة على مستويين، مستوى سياسي ومستوى حقوقي. في المستوى السياسي الحكومة اليمنية قدمت طلب في فترة من الفترات في 2017 أن تدرج الحركة كحركة إرهابية. بدأ وكأن هذا الأمر كان له مغازي سياسية أكثر من أن يكون له معنى حقوقي. دولتان ضمن دول التحالف العربي رسميا أدرجت الحركة كحركة إرهابية. ما قصدت أنا من حديثي هو أنه أن يتم إدراج الحركة الحوثية كحركة إرهابية لم يعد مستبعدا كما كان في بداية الأزمة لأسباب عديدة. أولا أنه الضغط الذي تواجهه الحركة ضمن تاريخها في انتهاكات لحقوق الإنسان والاستخدام المفرط للعنف وقربها التوصيفي من الحركات المماثلة التي تم رسميا إدراجهم كحركات إرهابية مثلا حزب الله قبل فترة بسيطة تم إدراجه كحركة إرهابية في المملكة المتحدة. وهنا يأتي السؤال أنه ما هي الصعوبات التي إذا لم تقم الحركة الحوثية بتحويل كيانها إلى كيان سياسي وهو المطلب الذي يتم حتى طلبه من قبل دول التحالف والحكومة الشرعية، إذا تم تصنيف الحركة الحوثية كحركة إرهابية ضمن التغيرات السياسية الآن التي تحصل على المستوى الدولي، فهذا سينقل المعركة إلى مسافات أخرى، ويبدو بعد ذلك الحديث عن الذهاب إلى طاولة المفاوضات أمر صعب جدا، لأنه لا يمكن رسميا أن يذهب الإنسان للتفاوض مع حركة إرهابية مثل داعش والقاعدة. فهنا كان ضمن سياق الحديث أنه ينبغي لبعض الأسس التي ينبغي أن يتفق عليها اليمنيين، وهي نبذ العنف والابتعاد عن لغة السلاح. ويبدو الحركة الحوثية بالتأكيد أنها الملامة الأولى في هذه القضية.
Is there any other questions from the floor? We still have time if you have any important questions. Otherwise,
leave it around the coffee.
Yeah. In the meantime, if you don't have any comment, I will just draw. Please go ahead.
It's again about your target group of the survey, because it's following the question of Patricia. Do you think if you do the questionnaire again and you have more than 991, say you have 500, would you expect different results?
I don't think that I will expect different results, because if we go for like the 90% I got, for example, it's not necessarily that it's just representing one party or of this conflict or another party or South, or representing people who are supporting the legitimate government, or just representing the Houthis. Everybody thinks that this is the situation. For example, this is one example. If we go like this questionnaire didn't come out from nowhere. It came because there was a campaign on the radio, on the TV, on the social media, everywhere. People are not satisfied, and it hasn't been just recently. It's been there for quite a long time. People felt being left behind, exactly. So this is the situation, exactly, and it could be a call for a deeper analysis for this situation. Yes, this is my tools, and this is my capacity, and this is the boundaries I had. But why not to do another research on a?
I think you can improve your expand your points. It will be wise, because of always there is a development in the situation. Thank you very much for the panelists, which they have not only suffered by their presentation, by my questions too. I'm sorry. But I have to ask them, being a moderator, I wanted to make them useful to you, to give you more logic points. So in your behalf, I say thank you, especially to our lady here, which she really presented her very outstanding methodology presentation. And thank you all for your listening, for your involvement, for your dialogue with the participant here, with the panelists, and you have a break for coffee and networking. And thank you for being with us in this club. And in your behalf, I present my thanks to the Swiss Press Club and to the our brother translator is there. And thank you very much for everyone. And I close the